Hello there, welcome. Hello there, welcome once again to our science lesson. Now, we have explored body systems. We have found out that they need to coordinate so that they work together. But sometimes you realize that maybe your body systems are not functioning as the way they are supposed to function. So we have different causes why body systems cannot be able to function the way they are supposed to do. Some of those reasons include when a body is invaded with pathogens. In other words, if the parts of the system are diseased. So our question is, for instance, you can wake up in the morning, but the way you are feeling yesterday is not the same when you have just woken up. So what's the problem? Maybe you have a headache, something like that, or you have a running nose, or you are coughing. Those are some of the things or some of the factors that we can say there is a change in your body system. So some of the reasons why body systems change their functioning is due to presence of microorganisms. So today we want to explore this topic, microorganisms. We want to find out what are microorganisms, the kind or groups of microorganisms, and the impacts of microorganisms in body systems. So from the word micro itself, these are organisms that are usually microscopic in nature, or they are tiny, or sometimes we can say they are submicroscopic. So when you talk of microorganisms, they are microbes. This is another name, are microbes. So microbes is an alternative name for microorganisms. So we have said microorganisms are those tiny or very microscopic organisms, are microscopic organisms. And because they are microscopic, they cannot be seen by naked eyes. Therefore, cannot be seen by naked eyes. So what is the meaning of naked eyes? The eyes that are not aided. Without an aid, you cannot be able to see them because they are very tiny. So for us to see these microscopic organisms or even study them, then we require apparatus to enable us be able to see and even study them. So some of the apparatus that are required for this purpose ranges from hand lens to electronic microscope. But hand lens are not very effective. So the best way of actually studying and looking at these organisms and studying them is by use of microscopes. Therefore, they are studied using microscopes. There are two main types of microscopes that I used to study microorganisms. We have what we call light microscope. Light microscope, the way it suggests light, it's going to use light to illuminate the specimen. Uses light to illuminate the specimen. Specimen is that item or object that is being viewed through a light microscope. The source of light could be varied. The source of light could be either natural light from sunlight or from another source, a secondary source, which could be electricity. The other type is electronic microscope. Electronic microscope, it uses a beam of electrons to illuminate. Beam of electrons to illuminate the specimen. So the only difference between light and electron or electronic microscope is what is going to be involved for operation, but also the power. Resolution of light microscope is slightly low, while if electronic microscope is very high. So for that purpose, light microscope can be able to view those microorganisms that are slightly large in size, ranging from maybe 1 micrometer to 10 micrometers. So below that, below 1 micrometer, it becomes very difficult for light, therefore electronic microscope comes in. But you don't want to dwell on the light and electron microscope. Our main subject is on microorganisms. The main groups of microbes include, we have bacteria, we have fungi, we have protozoans, some algae, not all algae. These are the major groups of microbes. But we also have another group that can be classified as microorganisms, but there is a controversy. We have viruses and another group called Prions. For the first four, there are microorganisms, but they are characterized by two major features. One of them is that bacteria, fungi, protozoans, and some of the algae, they are made up of cells. So bacteria will be in form of cell, fungi in form of cell, protozoan a cell, algae in form of a cell. So you realize that the four groups are usually made up of one cell. The whole body of a bacteria is made up of one cell. Fungi, one cell. Protozoans and algae, the same. So because of that being made of one cell, they are usually said to be single-celled. Or another word, you can also say they are unicellular. Unicellular, meaning one. Uni means one. Their body is made up of one cell. But that cell, again, is enclosed, or the contents of the cell are enclosed by a cell membrane. So one major characteristic of these 4 microorganisms is that their body will be composed of one cell, and the contents of the cell will be enclosed by a cell membrane. This was established, or is established, in what we call cell theory. Cell theory. So cell theory states that every cell or every organism has a cell. Each organism has a cell, and that cell, the content of the cell are enclosed by a cell membrane. We come back to this too. They are very tiny, very microscopic, but they cannot be described to be in form of cellular. They are not cellular. Viruses are not cellular. Prions are not cellular. Again, they lack cell membrane. Now, how do you identify whether an organism is a cell or not? Remember from your previous year, when you are looking at the cell, you defined a cell as the basic structural and functional unit of life, which means very many cells will come together, if it's a multicellular organism, to form the body of that organism. But at the same time, all the functions of that organism can occur in a single cell. All the functions of bacteria occur in a single cell. What are some of the functions that we are talking about? Functions like respiration, functions like reproduction, functions like cell growth and development, even gaseous exchange, which means a single cell is able to carry all the characteristics of life. Those are some of the characteristics of life. So bacteria, fungi, protozoa, algae is able to carry out all those characteristics of life, despite the fact that it's just made up of one cell. But for viruses and prions, they are not able to carry out those characteristics of life independently. For a virus to reproduce, it requires a host, the same to prions. So it requires a host so that it can now multiply its material. And you realize that most of the viruses are just made up of this material called DNA, and some either having the 2 DNA or either of them, either RNA or DNA, or just one or both of them, the same 2 prions. So viruses and prions cannot be classified as unicellular or single-celled organisms because, one, they lack cells, as we have already found out. They lack cells, or they are unicellular, and then they have no cell membrane. They lack cell membrane. But now the question is, why should we study them under microorganisms? Microorganisms from medieval ages have been known to alter microbes. Microbes bring about changes in our bodies. But those changes are not desirable. They are not positive changes. Most of the changes that are brought about by invasion of these microorganisms in our bodies, they bring about malfunctioning of our bodies. For instance, if you are infected with an influenza virus, you develop what we call either common cold, because it has changed the way the system is working. So they bring about changes in our bodies, but most of those changes are not functional. They cannot help our system. Instead, it impairs the working of the body system. So that process by which the body has been impaired to function, we call that condition as a disease. So in other words, Microbes bring about diseases in our bodies, inclusive of viruses and prions. That's why we are looking at viruses and prions under the same headline or under the same concept of microorganisms. So the underlying concept is that microbes, they bring about changes in our bodies, and those changes in our bodies, they lead to impairment of the functioning of the body. So because of that, they cause diseases to our body. And a lot of technologies have been developed so that now we can be able to study all of these groups, bacteria, fungi, protozoans, and algae, together with viruses and prions, so that now we can be able to find ways of dealing with the effect of these microorganisms. So the study of diseases is called pathology. In fact, pathology is a very wide field right now because it's just dealing with the study of diseased parts. So we want to look at some few questions to find out some of the examples of diseases that are caused by microorganisms. So we shall use a table just to help us get these types of diseases and the causal agents. So the table shall have 3 columns, where we shall have a column for pathogen. Any organism that invades the body and causes disease is called a pathogen. So examples of bacteria, of fungi, of viruses that will cause a disease shall be grouped under the headline pathogens. So we have pathogens, and then type of microorganism. We have identified 3 or 6 types of microbes: bacteria, fungi, viruses, algae, and prions, and then the disease they cause. So one of the pathogen is Clostridium tetani. Now, these are scientific names. Scientific names are supposed to be universal names. All over the world, they are given the same name. So because of that, when you are writing scientific names, we have some rules that you observe. Each organism is usually given 2 names. The first name is called a generic name or a genus name, and the second is called a species name. Generic name usually starts with a capital letter, and the genus and the rest of the letters in the name are usually written in small letters. But because you are writing using your hand, you are supposed to underline the word or the name. But the underlining is supposed to be separate. So you underline separately. But if you are using a print media, what you are supposed to do, you use the italics. So Clostridium tetani, the first letter is capital and the rest of the letters in the 2 names are small, but now we underline. Type of microbe. You are going to look at the type of we shall be going together with you. So this is the first one, the pathogen Clostridium tetani. So I want you to identify the type of microbe Clostridium tetani is and the disease it causes. So from the disease, it's very easy for you to get it. The last part of the name of the pathogen can easily give you the name of the disease. So tetani, that one is very easy. You can easily give the name of the disease, that is tetanus. And then the microbe, that is a bacteria. The second pathogen is a Trichophyton. Trichophyton. Again, this is a scientific name. I've just given the genus name or generic name, and that is a fungus. So if we have many of them, we shall call fungi, but one, we call it fungus. Singular, and then plural. So the disease that it causes is called thrush. Then 3, we have Neisseria. Neisseria gonorrhea. Again, this is a scientific name. You underline them separately. The genus name should start with a capital letter and the rest of the letters, small letters. Neisseria gonorrhea. So the disease you can easily identify the disease from the species name. It causes gonorrhea. The type of microbe is a bacteria. Then the other pathogen, very common in tropics, Plasmodium Malariae. Again, we underline the 2 words. The first name starts with a capital letter, the rest of the letters, small letters. Again, it's very easy to identify the disease from this. A very common disease in the tropics is called malaria. But the type of microbe, the microorganism, is a Plasmodium. Plasmodium. And it's a parasite. So we can continue with the list. Pathogen number 5. We have the Bototella pertussis. This one is a bacteria. It causes kind of cough called whooping. A whooping cough. Then we have a virus, human immunodeficiency virus. The type of microbe, already you have been given the name. From that, the name of the microbe. And then the disease is called HIV, AIDS. Acquired immunodeficient syndrome. Acquired immunodeficient syndrome. So the list, we have so many kinds, but we shall use just a few. We shall look at a few of them. And then we have, we can start from this side. A disease, cholera. Then we go backwards, or we identify the pathogen. Pathogen that causes cholera is called Vibrio cholerae. Vibrio cholerae. Vibrio cholerae causes a disease called cholera. And then the type of microbe, that is a bacteria. So we can look at several of them. Viral, again, we can begin from here. German measles, also called rubella. It is caused by a pathogen called Rubella virus. Rubella virus, as the name suggests, then the type becomes very easy. So we can have a very long list of diseases, type of microbe, and the pathogen. So you can continue the list through your internet research and school library research. The other question, a question of knowledge, you can look at the following. Define the term. Microorganism. So we have already looked at the meaning of microorganism. We have said microorganism is that organism that is usually microscopic, and for that purpose or for that reason it cannot be seen by use of naked eyes. Therefore cannot be seen by naked eye or eyes. The other question, explain why viruses and prions are not classified as living organisms. Explain why viruses and prions are not classified as living organisms. So when we are grouping microbes, we said we have 6 of them, but 4, they are living organisms because they are consistent, they correspond to the cell theory. Cell theory states that all living organisms are made up of cells, and those cells, their contents are enclosed by a cell membrane. But for these 2 viruses and prions, they do not go consistent with that statement or that premise. Viruses and prions are not cellular. Their structures or their body is not made up of a cell. And again, they lack cell membrane. So explain why viruses and prions are not classified as living organisms, because their body, their structure is not cellular, and they lack cell membrane. But still, they'll cause changes in our bodies. In other words, they're able to cause diseases. Some viruses are just, they're able to coexist in our bodies without actually causing a lot of harm. But others, they cause diseases. We are going to find out how they're able to cause those diseases. Question number 4, explain why we study viruses and prions. Viruses and prions when investigating changes in the body due to microorganisms. Explain why we study viruses and prions when investigating changes in the body due to microorganisms. So the first statement that we must take note is microorganism. They are already microorganisms. They are microbes. They are microscopic in nature. But changes in the body, as we have looked at our list of pathogens and diseases, we have identified in our columns where we were able to fill in a pathogen that was viral and a disease that was as a result of the same. So one thing that we must qualify is that these two, prions and viruses, are microscopic. They are microscopic. They are microscopic. That's why we shall study them under microorganisms and have ability to cause changes in the body. In other words, they are able to cause diseases. They cause diseases. So for that purpose, when we are studying microorganisms that cause changes in the body, we shall also include viruses and prions, so that now we can understand how they cause the disease, the inversion process or mechanism, and how we can be able to deal with the diseases that are caused by viruses. Question number 5, define the term pathogen. We just define pathogen. So as we have already stated, any microorganisms that will cause change in the body of another organism shall be referred to as a pathogen. So any disease-causing agent is called a pathogen. Is a disease-causing agent. If you give example, as we have already mentioned, Plasmodium Malariae, causing a disease called malaria. So in this case, Plasmodium Malariae is a pathogen. Then number 6, Name types of microorganisms that are pathogenic. Types of microorganisms that are pathogenic. We have identified the 6 groups, but among those 6 groups, only 4 are seriously pathogenic. We can start with the first one, bacteria. Bacteria is a type of microorganism, but they are able to cause diseases. We have mentioned several examples, like a Vibrio cholerae, e.g. Vibrio cholerae causing a disease called cholera. We have looked at the fungus. We have several fungus that cause diseases. E.g., we have mentioned Trichophyton. Trichophyton associated with thrush. Viruses. We have mentioned the Rubella virus. Which causes German measles. Then the last question, seven, define the term pathology. Define the word or the term pathology. Again, this was very easy. We said pathology simply means the study of diseases. Study of diseases. It's called pathology because parts of the body will be involved that are diseased, and they'll be examined to find out why they have been diseased, what has caused the disease. So in the process, you'll identify the pathogen, how it invaded the body, and at the same time, you can also find out how to treat that part of the body. So something again worth mentioning is now transmission. Transmission of diseases. So when we started the lesson, we said that sometimes you can wake up in the morning and then you feel something different. Maybe you have a sore throat. So you wonder, where did you acquire the sore throat? So the sore throat that you have acquired or that you have is due to transmission of a disease. When you talk of transmission of a disease, it's that transfer of a pathogen from an infected person to a healthy individual. So there are several ways through which transmission can actually take place. We have direct and then we have indirect. We are going to explore each of those methods. So transmission is the transfer of pathogen from an infected person to a healthy individual. So once the pathogen invades the healthy individual or a healthy individual, then it's going to cause the symptoms of a disease after incubation period. So means of transmission. How does transmission take place? We have two ways in which transmission takes place. We have direct transmission. Direct transmission. For instance, if we have had cases of Ebola in the tropics or in Africa, specifically Democratic Republic of Congo. Such a disease, simply by touching an individual who is sick, then a healthy individual can be able to acquire the disease. The other disease that can be directly transmitted is HIV through sexual contact. So, in other words, for direct transmission, we are going to have a contact between the infected person and that healthy individual that will allow now the pathogens to cross from that infected person to a healthy individual. So direct transmission involves is where on direct contact of infected person with healthy individual allows transfer of pathogens to health person. So simply by direct contact, if, for example, even through shaking, we are going to mention some of the ways in which direct transmission can occur. Just by getting into contact with an infected person, then you as a healthy individual, you acquire the disease. So examples of direct transmission. Examples of direct transmission. We have said, for instance, sexual contact. Some of the diseases we have, like HIV/AIDS, is transmitted through sexual contact. We have herpes. We have Candida albicans, and several others. So in sexual contact, the major medium for transmission of the disease is mainly body fluids. Body fluids could be semen, mainly, and sometimes maybe through blood if sexual contact, and if there's sexual contact and we have wounds in the genitalia. Another example of direct transmission, through kissing. Kissing will allow transmission of pathogens, mainly through thin membranes of the mouth, in the mouth. Others include like blood transfusion. blood transfusion. Blood transfusion, we have had cases where after blood transfusion, somebody acquires a disease. For instance, again, you can use AIDS and even herpes. We also have like touching the infected persons. Touching infected persons. For instance, I've given an example of Ebola. Ebola is a very contagious disease. I've used the word contagious. So that's also another term that applies to those diseases that are simply transmitted through direct contact with the infected persons. So we call them contagious diseases. Any contact, sexual, kissing, blood transfusion, touching, even sometimes handshakes, handshaking can allow transmission of the diseases. So examples of these diseases, we can also look at, again, examples, exact examples of the same. Examples of diseases transmitted directly. We have mentioned several. Ebola is one of them. We have mentioned AIDS. We had a disease some time back in this in the decades. It was called leprosy. Just through direct contact, then somebody would acquire the disease. We have syphilis, specifically through sexual contact. We have gonorrhea, even measles. So the list is always long, but you can always find many examples on your own through your own library research or through the internet. So I've said these diseases that are transmitted directly or through direct contact, we give them a name called, they are called contagious disease. From the word contact, then you're able to acquire the disease. Another means of transmission of disease is indirect contact. Indirect contact. Indirect contact. So in this case, for indirect contact, what happens? The pathogens are usually let into some medium. For instance, air, water, or soil, and also through some vectors. Through contaminated medium. Contaminated medium, in this case, contaminated medium could be air. Pathogens are let into air and then they are inhaled by a healthy individual. Water. When water is contaminated with, for instance, pathogens of cholera, Vibrio cholerae. Food. When you swallow food that is contaminated with pathogens, then again you are able to acquire the disease. Or maybe not just a medium, but another organism. One organism carries another two from a healthy individual from an infected individual to a healthy individual. We call them vectors. Vectors is an organism that carry a vector, an organism that carry a pathogen from an infected person to a healthy individual. So it will carry a pathogen. It will just transfer a pathogen from infected to a healthy person. So we shall call that organism that is aiding in the movement or in the movement of the pathogen from infected to health as a vector. So examples of this means include when, for instance, someone coughs and then he releases droplets of mucus, or he sneezes droplets of maybe body fluids, and those body fluids are contaminated with the pathogen, and then you inhale. So once you inhale, the spores of the bacteria or the virus or the fungi are going to find an enabling environment, they multiply, and then they cause a disease. So inhaling droplets from sneezed from an infected person. This is very common with the tuberculosis. Another way is through contaminated water, swallowing or drinking, swallowing contaminated food, water, contaminated food or water. This will allow transmission of pathogen from infected to a healthy individual. This is very common with cholera. When somebody suffering from cholera disposes the feces in a very unhygienic manner, such that now the feces is the one that will be containing the Vibrio cholerae or the bacteria, and then it contaminates water or food. Once somebody swallows the food or the water containing such spots, then will be invaded by the disease. And then others include vectors, pathogens being transferred by vectors. E.g., a very good example, we have given malaria. Malaria is transmitted by a vector, and that vector is called female Anopheles mosquito. The word Anopheles is scientific and it's generic. So we have said any generic name must start with a capital letter, and the rest are supposed to be small letters, but you underline. So Anopheles is generic, female Anopheles mosquito. So other example, the last part of the example of transmission through touching. Through touching of infected person's skin. So let us look at a few examples of diseases transmitted indirectly. We have mentioned several of them, so we can just have them. We have one of them is malaria. We have cholera. We have typhoid fever. Even sleeping sickness. And several others. So at your own time again, you can find several examples of the same. So as we wind up, I just want us to look at one or two questions. Question 1, what are contagious diseases? We have already gone through, and it's very easy. We have said any disease that will be transmitted from an infected person or an healthy individual to a healthy individual through direct contact shall be called contagious disease. Is disease transmitted through direct contact between infected and healthy individuals. And healthy individual. The other question, question 2, for each of the following, identify each of the following, identify if the transmission transmission is direct or indirect. Is direct or indirect. We can mention some few examples. Shaking of hands. Now, when people shake hands and then it allows transmission of disease, are you going to call that one direct or indirect transmission of disease? We have direct contact and it's allowing transmission of disease. Therefore, that one is direct. We have sneezing. If one is sick and then he sneezes, he releases droplets or fluids, body fluids that have droplets of body fluids that have pathogens, but they'll go into air, and then when one inhales air into their body, they're able to get the disease. Therefore, that one is not direct contact, but is through a medium. Hence, we call that one as indirect transmission. And then the last example, mosquito bites. So when one is bitten by a mosquito and then he gets a disease like malaria, that is the medium or the means of transfer of the pathogen is actually that insect, the mosquito. So it's not direct, but it becomes indirect. So at your own time, you can continue researching more and more on direct and indirect means of transmission of diseases. Thank you. Welcome to our other lesson that will be there in the next session.